He didn't just drop my birthday cake. He looked me in the eyes and told me to pick it up and eat it. For a second I thought I had misheard him. The room was warm, filled with soft yellow lights and the quiet clinking of glasses, the kind of evening I had spent weeks planning down to the smallest detail. My name is Sophia Carter. I'm 32 years old, and until that night, I believed I understood exactly where I stood in my own marriage. It was my birthday. Nothing extravagant, just a small gathering in our suburban home about 20 minutes outside the city. A few close friends, a couple of Daniel's co-workers, and his sister. The kind of night that's supposed to feel safe. Familiar. Mine. I had spent the entire afternoon setting everything up. The table was decorated with simple white flowers, the kind you find at a local grocery store but arranged just right so they look like more than they are. The music played low in the background, something soft and easy, the kind that fills silence without demanding attention. And in the center of it all sat the cake. Chocolate, my favorite. 8 inches wide, smooth frosting, carefully written words in white icing. Happy birthday, Sophia. I remember staring at it earlier that evening, just for a second longer than necessary. Not because of the cake itself, but because of what it represented. Effort. Hope. Maybe even a quiet expectation that tonight would be different. Daniel walked in late, just like he always did. His presence shifted the room immediately, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that I felt it in my chest. Conversations paused for a fraction of a second before picking back up again. He smiled, greeted everyone, kissed me lightly on the cheek like it was routine, like it was expected, not like it meant anything. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself to enjoy the night, and for a while I did. People laughed. Glasses were raised. Someone made a joke about getting older, and I smiled along, playing the part one had played so many times before. But then there were the small things. The way Daniel interrupted me when I spoke. The way he corrected me in front of others, not harshly, just enough to make me feel smaller. The way his tone shifted slowly, like a storm building so quietly you almost convince yourself it isn't coming. I noticed it. Of course I did. I always noticed. But I also knew better than to react too soon. Not in front of people. Not on a night like this. So I stayed calm. I smiled. I carried on. And then came the moment. The candles flickered softly as someone dimmed the lights. Everyone gathered closer, their faces glowing in that warm golden hue. I stood there, hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from something else I couldn't quite name. Anticipation, maybe. Or the fragile hope that this moment would hold together. Make a wish, someone said. I looked at the candles. I took a breath. And just as I leaned forward, Daniel moved. It happened so fast. His hand reached out, and before I could process it, the cake tilted. For a split second it hovered there, suspended between what was and what was about to be. Then it hit the floor. The sound was soft, almost insignificant. But the silence that followed was not. Every voice in the room disappeared. Every movement stopped. I stared down at the mess, the frosting smeared across the hardwood floor. The words no longer readable. My name gone. And then I heard it. His voice. Calm. Almost amused. Pick it up, he said. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. If anything, everything inside me went still. For a moment, I wasn't standing in that room anymore. I was somewhere deeper, quieter, watching everything from a distance. Waiting. Go on, Daniel added, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his lips. Pick it up and eat it. And that's when something shifted. Not in the room. Not in him. In me. I did not bend down. I did not speak. I just stood there staring at the cake spread across the floor like something careless, something disposable. And for the first time that night, I became aware of every single person in that room. Not just their presence but their silence. It was heavy. Uncomfortable. No one laughed. No one stepped in. A few people shifted in their seats, eyes moving between me and Daniel, waiting to see what I would do. Like this was some kind of performance they did not sign up for but could not look away from. I slowly lifted my gaze from the floor to his face. Daniel looked relaxed, almost entertained, like he had just made a joke that had not landed yet, and he was waiting for someone to catch up. That same faint smile stayed on his lips, the one I had learned to recognize over the years. It was never loud, never obvious, but it always meant the same thing. He believed he was in control. He always believed that. I could feel my heartbeat steady, not racing, not panic, just present. That was new. Usually in moments like this, my chest would tighten, my thoughts would scatter, and I would rush to fix things, to smooth the tension, to make sure everything stayed calm. But this time I did not feel that urge. Instead, memories started surfacing, quiet and clear, like pieces of a puzzle finally aligning. The small comments over the years. The way he would correct me in front of others, always subtle enough to seem harmless. The way he handled money, decisions, conversations, always positioning himself as the one who knew better, who deserved more authority. And me, always adjusting, always accommodating, always telling myself it was not worth the argument. I remembered the first time I noticed it, about 3 years into our marriage, when he laughed at something I said in front of his friends, not with me, but at me. Everyone else had laughed too, and I had smiled, pretending it did not matter, but I had felt it. That quiet sting that you try to ignore because acknowledging it would mean admitting something is wrong. And over time, those moments had not disappeared. They had multiplied. Slowly, carefully, until they became part of our normal. A normal I had accepted without even realizing it. I glanced around the room again. His sister looked down at her glass, avoiding eye contact. One of his co-workers cleared his throat, like he wanted to say something but decided against it. My friend Rachel stood near the kitchen counter, her expression tense, her fingers gripping the edge of the marble surface like she was holding herself back from stepping forward. I noticed all of it. Every detail. Every reaction. And for the first time, I understood something I had never fully allowed myself to see before. This was not just about one moment. This was not about a cake or a comment or even this night. This was a pattern. And patterns do not change on their own. Daniel took a small step closer, his shoes stopping just inches from the mess on the floor. "What is the problem?" he said, his tone light, almost teasing, as if I was the one making things uncomfortable. "It is just cake." A few people let out awkward, quiet breaths, not quite laughs, more like attempts to release tension without choosing a side. I looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside me settled into place. Not anger, not sadness, something colder, clearer. "You want me to pick it up?" I asked softly, my voice steady enough that it surprised even me. His smile widened just slightly, like he had been waiting for that question. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what I want." Another pause. Another silence. But this time it felt different. Because now everyone was not just watching me. They were waiting. And so was he. Waiting for me to do what I had always done. Comply. Adjust. Stay small. I held his gaze for a moment longer. Then I looked down at the cake again. And this time, I smiled. I let that smile linger just long enough for him to notice it. Just long enough for the room to shift in a way he did not expect. Because Daniel knew my reactions. He knew my patterns. For years I had responded in predictable ways, soft, careful, always trying to keep the peace. But this was new. I took a slow breath, the scent of chocolate and sugar faint in the air mixed with the sharp, almost invisible tension that now filled the room. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood as I stepped forward, closing the small distance between me and the mess on the floor. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Someone shifted behind me. A glass touched a table. The music still played in the background, but it felt far away now, like it belonged to a different moment entirely. I lowered myself slightly, not all the way down, just enough to look closer at the cake. The frosting was smeared, the layers uneven now, the words completely gone. It no longer looked like something meant to celebrate anything. It looked like something discarded, something dismissed. I tilted my head just a little, studying it, as if I were considering his request seriously. Then I straightened again, slowly, deliberately, and turned back to him. "You are right," I said quietly, my voice calm, almost thoughtful. A few heads lifted at that. Daniel's expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face, like he had just proven something. "It is just cake," I continued, letting the words settle into the silence. My fingers brushed lightly against each other, a small, controlled movement, as if I were dusting something invisible away. "And you think this is nothing?" I watched him carefully. That smile again. Confident. Certain. He thought he understood exactly where this was going. He always did. "So go ahead," he said, his tone casual, almost bored now, like the moment had already passed in his mind. "Pick it up." There was a pause, just long enough for the room to lean in without anyone physically moving. I glanced around once more, meeting a few eyes this time. Rachel's wide and searching. One of the co-workers looking uncomfortable. His sister still avoiding me completely. And then I looked back at Daniel. "No," I said. The word was soft. Not loud. Not sharp. But it landed heavier than anything else that had been said that night. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer uncertain. It was charged. Daniel blinked just once, like he needed a second to process what he had heard. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Something tighter. I held his gaze steady, unshaken. "I said no." I could feel it now, that shift growing stronger inside me. Not dramatic, not explosive, just solid. Like something that had been unstable for years finally locking into place. "I am not picking it up," I added just as calmly. A quiet breath moved through the room, almost like a collective reaction no one intended to make. Daniel's posture changed just slightly. His shoulders squared. His chin lifted a fraction higher. He was not used to this. "Not from me. It is a simple request," he said, his tone sharpening just enough to be noticed. "Do not make this into something bigger than it is." Bigger than it is. I almost laughed at that, but I did not. Instead, I let the words settle. Let them echo in my mind for a moment. Because that was exactly how it had always worked. Minimize. Dismiss. Reduce everything until it felt small enough to ignore. I took a small step back, creating space not between me and the cake, but between me and him. "That is the problem," I said quietly. "You think this is small." His eyes narrowed slightly, confusion mixing with irritation now. He was losing control of the direction, and he could feel it. And for the first time in a very long time, so could I. Daniel let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, but close enough to carry that same edge of disbelief, like he was still trying to decide whether this was a joke or a mistake I would correct any second. "You are overreacting," he said, his voice lowering, more controlled now, the way it always did when he wanted to regain control without making it obvious. "It is a cake. That is all." I watched him carefully, noticing the way his jaw tightened just slightly, the way his eyes flicked around the room for a split second, checking who was watching, who was listening. He cared about that. He always had. Not in a loud way, not in a way that drew attention to itself, but in the subtle adjustments he made when other people were around. The version of him that existed in public was always just a little more polished, a little more measured. But tonight something had slipped. And he knew it. "No," I said again, a little more firmly this time, not louder, just clearer. "It is not just a cake." The words settled into the room, heavier than before, like they carried something beyond what they actually said. I could feel it in the way people shifted, in the way the air itself seemed to tighten around us. Daniel's expression changed again, the faint smile gone now, replaced by something sharper, something closer to irritation. "Then what is it?" he asked, his tone challenging but still careful, still trying to keep this contained. That question lingered for a moment, hanging between us, and I realized something as I stood there. For years, I had avoided answering that exact question. Not out loud, not even fully to myself. Because answering it would have meant acknowledging something I was not ready to face. Until now. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to say it right. "It is the way you talk to me," I said quietly. "It is the way you look at me when you think no one else notices. It is the way you make everything I do feel small." The room went completely still. Not the awkward kind of still from before, but something deeper. Something attentive. No one moved. No one interrupted. Daniel's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time that night, there was no smile, no amusement, no confidence. Just focus. "You are making this dramatic," he said after a second, his voice tighter now, less relaxed than before. "That is not what happened." I tilted my head slightly, studying him, noticing how quickly he tried to reshape the narrative, to redefine the moment into something manageable, something harmless. "That is exactly what happened," I replied just as calmly. You threw something that mattered to me on the floor. In front of everyone. And then you told me to pick it up like it did not matter. Like I do not matter. The last part came out softer than the rest, but it landed harder. I could see it in the way his shoulders shifted, in the way his gaze flickered for just a fraction of a second before returning to mine. Around us, the room felt different now. Not tense in the same way as before, but aware. Present. Rachel took a small step closer, not enough to interrupt, just enough to show she was there. One of the co-workers set his glass down quietly, the sound barely noticeable but somehow significant in the silence. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I had seen so many times before when things were not going the way he expected. You are twisting this, he said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. You always do this when you are emotional. Emotional. I almost smiled again at that word, at how familiar it sounded, how often it had been used to dismiss, to redirect, to avoid. But this time it did not land the way it used to. This time it did not shake me. No, I said softly. This is the first time I am not. And as I stood there, looking at him, I realized something that changed everything. This was not the moment where things fell apart. This was the moment where I finally saw them clearly. Daniel stared at me for a moment longer, like he was trying to decide which version of me he was dealing with. The one he had known for years or this one standing in front of him now, calm, steady, and completely unmoved. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, pressing in from all sides. Then he let out a small exhale and glanced around the room again, this time more openly, more aware of the eyes on him. That was when I saw it. Not anger. Not yet. Something else. Calculation. You are making everyone uncomfortable, he said finally, his tone shifting again, softer, almost reasonable, like he was trying to guide things back to normal. Let us not ruin the night over something so minor. Minor. That word echoed in my mind, familiar and tired, a word that had been used to shrink moments, to smooth over things that should have never been dismissed in the first place. I felt a quiet clarity settle deeper inside me, like a line had been drawn somewhere I could not unsee anymore. I am not the one who ruined anything, I replied, my voice still even, still controlled. A few people shifted again. Someone near the back cleared their throat softly. Rachel took another small step closer, her presence now just a few feet away from me, silent but unmistakably supportive. Daniel noticed it too. Of course he did. His eyes flicked toward her briefly, then back to me, and something in his expression tightened. He did not like losing the room. He did not like not being the center of control. Sophia, he said, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound more personal, more private, even though everyone could still hear every word. We can talk about this later. Later. Another familiar strategy. Delay. Redirect. Move it out of the moment so it could be reshaped, minimized, forgotten. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. We are not doing that. His jaw flexed just slightly. Doing what? He asked, though I could tell he already knew. Pretending this did not happen, I answered. Pretending this is normal. The word normal seemed to land harder than anything else. Because that was the truth neither of us had said out loud before. This had been normal. Not the cake, not the exact moment, but the pattern behind it. The tone. The dismissal. The quiet erosion of something that should have never been negotiable. Respect. Daniel straightened a little, his posture shifting into something more rigid, more defensive. You are exaggerating, he said, but there was less confidence behind it now. Less certainty. No, I repeated, softer this time but stronger. I am finally seeing it. That was when the energy in the room changed again. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough that it could not be ignored. People were no longer just watching. They were understanding. Slowly, quietly. One of his co-workers glanced down at the floor, then back up at me, his expression different now, less neutral. His sister finally looked up, her eyes moving between us, uncertain, like she was seeing something she had always avoided acknowledging. Daniel noticed all of it. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the way his gaze moved more quickly now, taking in reactions, measuring them. For the first time that night, he was not entirely sure how this would end. So what do you want? He asked, and this time there was no softness in his tone, no attempt to smooth things over. Just a direct question. It hung there, heavier than anything before it. What do I want? I let that question sit for a second, feeling the weight of it, not because I did not know the answer, but because I had never allowed myself to say it out loud. Not like this. Not in front of him. Not in front of everyone. I took a slow breath, steady and deliberate, and looked at him without hesitation. I want you to understand something, I said quietly. This stops tonight. The words were simple, clear, but the way they landed changed everything. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt it. Not in the room, not in the silence, but inside him. Daniel did not respond right away. He just stood there, staring at me like he was recalculating everything in real time, trying to find the version of this situation where he still had control. But there was none. Not anymore. What does that even mean? He asked finally, his voice lower now, tighter, like each word had to push through something that was no longer working the way it used to. I did not rush to answer. I let the silence stretch just enough to make it clear that this was no longer his pace, no longer his rhythm. Then I spoke. It means I am done accepting this, I said calmly. I am done pretending this is normal. I am done letting you decide what matters and what does not. A faint sound moved through the room again. Not quite a reaction. More like the collective realization that something irreversible was happening. Daniel's expression hardened, his posture shifting again, but this time it was different. Less confident. More defensive. You are blowing this out of proportion, he said, but even as he spoke, the certainty was gone. This is one moment. I shook my head slightly. No, irreplaceable. This is every moment. That landed. I saw it in his eyes, in the brief pause that followed, in the way he did not immediately have a response ready. Because deep down he knew. He knew exactly what I was talking about. And that was the part he could not control. I took a small step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to close the distance again, to make sure he could not escape this with another excuse or another deflection. You think this is about a cake? I continued, my voice steady, unwavering. But it is not. It is about the way you have treated me for years. The way you speak to me when you think no one will notice. The way you dismiss me like I am an afterthought in my own life. His jaw tightened again, and this time he looked away for a split second before forcing his gaze back to mine. That was new. That had never happened before. Around us, the room felt different now. Not just silent but present. Fully aware. No one was pretending anymore. No one was looking away. Rachel stood still, her arms now crossed lightly, her expression no longer just concerned but resolute. One of Daniel's co-workers shifted his weight, his face serious, no longer neutral. Even his sister, who had avoided this the entire time, was watching now, her eyes moving between us, uncertain but no longer disconnected. Daniel saw it. He saw all of it. And for the first time the room was no longer his. So what are you saying? He asked. And this time there was something else in his voice, something closer to frustration, to disbelief. What is it that you want from me right now? I held his gaze, letting that question settle fully before answering, because this time, I was not speaking out of emotion. I was speaking out of clarity. I want you to understand that this version of me, I said slowly, the one who stays quiet, who lets things go, who keeps everything together while you tear it down piece by piece, she does not exist anymore. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything before them. No one moved. No one spoke. Daniel blinked once, like he needed that moment to catch up to what had just been said. And then, for the first time that night, he did not have an immediate response. Just silence. Real silence. Because something had shifted in a way he could not reverse. And we both knew it. Daniel opened his mouth like he was about to say something, then stopped, the words catching somewhere between instinct and realization. For years he had always known what to say next. He had always had the final word, the subtle shift, the quiet dismissal that put everything back in its place. But now that place no longer existed. Sophia, he started, his tone softer this time, almost careful, like he was stepping onto unfamiliar ground. You are taking this too far. There it was again. That attempt to pull things back, to shrink the moment, to make it manageable. But it did not land the way it used to. Not anymore. I held his gaze steady and unshaken. No, I said quietly. I am finally taking it exactly as far as it has always been. The room remained still, but it was no longer the kind of silence that waited for resolution. It was the kind that recognized it had already begun. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders rising and falling as he tried to regain some sense of control. "So what now?" he asked, and this time there was something different in his voice. Not confidence, not authority, something closer to uncertainty. That question hung in the air, heavier than anything he had said before, because this time he was not directing the moment. He was reacting to it. I let a small pause settle between us, not to create tension, but because for the first time I was not rushing to respond. I did not need to. "Now," I said slowly, "I stop being the person who lets this happen." I could see the shift in his expression again, subtle but undeniable. He did not like that answer. It did not give him anything to argue against, nothing to twist, nothing to redirect. Simply stood. Solid. Unmovable. "You are acting like I have done something terrible," he said, his tone tightening again, frustration beginning to show through. It was a joke. People joke. A few glances moved around the room at that, quick, uncertain, like no one was quite sure whether to agree or stay silent. I noticed it, but it did not pull me off course. "Jokes are supposed to be funny," I replied calmly. "Not at someone's expense. Not like this." He ran a hand through his hair again, the movement sharper this time, less controlled. "You are making me look bad in front of everyone," he said, and there it was. Not an apology. Not understanding. Concern for how he appeared. I felt something settle even deeper inside me, a quiet confirmation of everything I had just said.
"No," iyan suarat sufli.
"You did that yourself." The words landed with a clarity that left no space for interpretation. For a moment no one spoke. Daniel's eyes held mine, searching like he was trying to find some version of me that would back down, that would soften, that would restore the balance he was used to. But there was nothing there for him to find, because that version was gone. I glanced down briefly at the cake on the floor, then back at him. And this time there was no hesitation in my voice at all. "You wanted me to pick it up," I said. "But what you really expected was for me to stay the same." Another pause. Another silence. But this one felt final, because something had just been said that could not be undone. Daniel did not respond right away. His lips pressed together slightly, his posture no longer as steady as it had been at the beginning of the night. The room watched, waited, but this time not for me. And in that moment, I realized something I had not fully understood until now. This was no longer about proving anything to him. It was about no longer proving anything at all. I straightened slightly, my shoulders relaxed, my breathing even, and for the first time that night, I felt completely grounded. Not shaken. Not uncertain. Just clear. And that clarity changed everything. Daniel did not move. He did not speak. But the shift in him was unmistakable now. Not loud, not dramatic, just visible in the way his posture no longer carried the same certainty, in the way his eyes no longer held that quiet confidence that had defined him for so long. For a brief second it almost looked like he wanted to say something else, something different, but whatever it was, it never came, because deep down he knew. There was nothing left to reshape, nothing left to minimize, nothing left to control. I let the silence breathe for a moment longer, not to stretch it, not to make a point, but because it felt natural. For once I was not rushing to fill it. Then slowly I turned away from him. Not abruptly, not with anger, just calmly, like I was stepping out of something that no longer belonged to me. I walked toward the kitchen counter where Rachel stood, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet understanding that did not need words. She gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. Enough to remind me that I was not alone in what I had just done, even if this had never been about anyone else. I reached for a clean napkin, my movements steady, controlled, and for a brief moment, I could feel Daniel's gaze still on me, still trying to understand, still trying to find some way to pull this back into something familiar. But there was nothing familiar left. I wiped my hands lightly, even though they were not dirty, just something to ground the moment, to mark the transition from what had just happened to what came next. Then I set the napkin down and turned back slightly, just enough to face the room, not just him. "I think the night is over," I said quietly. No raised voice.
No dramatic tone.
Just a simple statement. A few people shifted immediately, like they had been waiting for permission to move, to breathe, to step out of the tension that had held them in place. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Someone picked up a coat. The music still played in the background, but it no longer fit the moment, like it belonged to a version of the night that had already ended. Daniel took a step forward then, finally breaking his stillness. "So that is it?" he asked, his voice sharper now, not loud, but edged with something that had not been there before. Frustration. Maybe even a hint of disbelief. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I did not feel the need to adjust myself to his reaction. "That is it for tonight," I replied calmly. The distinction was clear, and he heard it. His expression tightened again, but he did not argue. Not immediately. Around us, people were already beginning to leave, offering quiet goodbyes, avoiding eye contact with him, some glancing at me with something different in their eyes now. Not pity. Not discomfort. Something closer to respect. Rachel stepped beside me, her presence steady, her voice low as she spoke near my shoulder. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked softly. I shook my head just slightly. "I am okay," I said, and for the first time I meant it without hesitation. She studied my face for a second, then nodded, trusting it before reaching for her coat. One by one, the room emptied, the tension dissolving into quiet movement, until it was just the two of us left. Daniel and me. The cake still on the floor between us, untouched. He looked down at it for a moment, then back at me like he was seeing it for the first time, not as something trivial, not as something dismissible, but as something that had changed everything. And this time he did not tell me to pick it up. He did not say anything at all. Because now, he understood. I stood there for a moment after the last guest left, listening to the quiet settle into the house like it had been waiting all night for its turn. The soft music was still playing in the background, but now it felt distant, almost out of place, like a memory that had not realized it was over. The lights still glowed warm against the walls, the decorations still sat exactly where I had placed them hours ago, but everything felt different. Not broken. Not chaotic. Just clear. I looked down at the cake again, still spread across the floor, untouched, exactly where it had fallen. For a brief second, I remembered how much effort I had put into this night. The planning, the details, the quiet hope that it would mean something. And then I realized something even more important. It had meant something, just not in the way I expected. Behind me, I could hear Daniel shift slightly, the sound of his shoes against the hardwood floor softer now, less certain. He did not come closer. He did not speak right away. And that silence, that hesitation, told me more than any words could have. "Sophia," he said finally, his voice lower than I had ever heard it, not controlled, not confident, just uncertain. I did not turn immediately. I let the moment sit, not out of resistance, but because I no longer felt the need to respond on his timing. When I did turn, it was slow, deliberate, my expression calm, my posture relaxed. "What?" I asked quietly. He looked at me like he was trying to find the right words, like he was searching for something that used to come easily to him and now did not. "I did not mean," he started, then stopped, the sentence fading before it could take shape. I watched him, not with anger, not with resentment, but with a kind of distance I had never felt before. Not physical distance, but emotional clarity. "You did," I said gently. "You meant exactly what you said." The words were not sharp. They were not meant to hurt. They were simply true. He looked down for a moment, then back up, his expression shifting again. Something softer, something closer to realization. He tried again, but this time he did not finish at all. Because there was nothing left to explain. No version of this that could be reshaped into something harmless. I nodded slightly, not in agreement but in acknowledgement. "I know," I said. And I did. I understood the pattern, the habits, the years of small moments that had built up into something bigger than either of us had ever said out loud. But understanding it did not mean accepting it anymore. I walked past him slowly, heading toward the hallway, my steps steady, my mind quiet in a way it had not been in a very long time. He did not stop me. He did not reach out. And for the first time, that absence did not feel like something I needed to fix. Felt like space. Real space. I paused near the doorway just for a second, not to look back, not to reconsider, but to take in the feeling of it. The silence. The clarity. The absence of that constant pressure to adjust, to smooth things over, to keep everything from falling apart. Because now, I understood something I had never fully allowed myself to believe before. Some things are supposed to fall apart. Not because they are weak, but because they were never meant to be carried alone. I took one more breath, slow and steady, then continued forward without hesitation. And as I walked away, I did not feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was finally leaving something behind,